Marianne Street.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It gives me pleasure to rise to speak to Jackie Dean's bill, and I add my congratulations to those of other colleagues to her for advancing this bill. Mr. Speaker, we've seen in the last few years numerous pictures on our televisions of senseless clubbing of seals, or the smuggling of creatures that are precious to our country, that are unique in our country, smuggling them offshore. And I think there were a number of incidents that provoked Jackie Dean into bringing this bill forward, and they cause as much anger amongst any member of the public, apart from those who seem to perpetrate these acts. I'm absolutely certain that the vast majority of New Zealanders would consider that anybody who takes to, even if they are a famous rugby player and a well-known hooker rugby player, that they would view the kinds of senseless acts of killing and maiming animals, defenceless animals, and they would see it as something that needed serious penalties to act as a deterrent for that kind of behaviour. If there are still people, and there would appear to be, given a court case that's on at the moment, which I won't refer to anymore, Mr. Speaker, but given that there are some in our country who do not seem to understand that harming animals, harming livestock, harming birds, says a lot about their own attitudes towards people. And this bill at least might have some corrective effect, so that we don't see so many of those bloody scenes on our televisions where animals have been senselessly butchered and maimed by people who really had trouble relating to human beings, and so vent their wrath and their anger on creatures that are more vulnerable than they are. I cannot think of any other reason why somebody would do these things, Mr. Speaker. I understand hunting, so I'm not criticising that in any way. What I am criticising is the senseless attacks, particularly on protected species, but on any animals. Mr. Speaker, this bill, as Phil Heatley has just catalogued, proposes a two-tier penalty arrangement for people who offend. So it does take into account that there might have been unintentional offences. You didn't mean the dog to get loose and savage that seal on the beach. You didn't mean something to happen quite the way it did. But even so, if a person did not intend to commit an offence, they are still liable to an imprisonment of 1 year and a fine of up to $100,000, or both, depending on the severity of the incident. Bodies corporate that might inadvertently or otherwise commit offences against the protected animals under this legislation would be fined up to $200,000. And if people are continuing to do it on a daily basis, then they are fined $10,000 per day. That is something of a deterrent. And I am pleased, however, that that we have gone a little bit further with the intentional offences, where people senselessly go to the Kaikoura coast, track down the little baby seals that have gone up to the waterfall, and have been a delight to many visitors who have gone past and tourists who have stopped and been told about these seals up on land, that they should bludgeon those animals to death. There is no excuse, and while the financial penalties remain the same, they are liable for an imprisonment period of up to 2 years. But the other ones that really disturb us, Mr. Speaker, are those shots that we've seen on TV recently where people take tuatara and geckos and skinks and other small creatures that are unique to New Zealand, that are amongst our protected fauna, and they strap them to various parts of their anatomy and they try to smuggle them out of the country. Sometimes they might put them in tubes and suitcases. But however they do it, their intention is to smuggle them out of the country for commercial gain. The penalties for those people of acting as individuals is up to 5 years in prison and up to $300,000 in fines, or both. And for body corporates, a fine of up to $300,000. And a continuing offence, happening more than once, is $20,000, up to $20,000 per day. So here are some deterrents against this reprehensible behaviour, Mr. Speaker. But one of the things I'm really pleased about was the way the Select Committee, under the chairpersonship of Nikki Wagner, actually addressed some of the issues behind this legislation. I think collectively across the committee we made some improvements to the bill, but one of the things I'm most pleased about was the possibility of expanding the coverage of the bill to cover the Marine Mammals Protection Act of 1978 and also the Wildlife Act of 1953. So the Marine Mammals Protection Act is amended by deleting the penalty, if I just get this right for a moment, Mr. Speaker, deleting the Wildlife Act, I beg your pardon, I'll go back to the Wildlife Act 1953. To remove from Section 67 of the Wildlife Act a fine provision that sits in that Act, take that out and replace it with the fine provisions, or make the fine provisions in that legislation consistent with this one that I hope we will advance further this evening. So there will be a consistency of approach across all of the penalties, because it is entirely possible for people who bludgeon seals for fun to get off with a lesser penalty depending on the piece of legislation under which they've been brought to court. And so that doesn't seem fair. So we were able, and I was pleased to engage with the Minister of Conservation, Nick Smith, and to ask him about the application of the Marine Mammals Act and the Wildlife Act and how they might be put into this piece of legislation. He was very pleased to make that recommendation to Jackie Dean, because it was her bill, but he was on side with that. Jackie Dean was on side with it, the Select Committee was on side with it, and as a result we've got a consistent framework across all pieces of protective legislation in this area, and the Select Committee passed it unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Eugenie Sage.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker, thank you. I'm pleased to take a call on the conservation